Imagine this: a group of right-wing activists storms a mosque during Friday prayers. They film inside. They disrupt worship. They terrify families. What would happen? CNN would run it 24/7. The FBI would open a hate crime investigation within hours. Every politician in Washington would condemn it. And the people involved, they'd be in federal custody before sundown. Now let me tell you what actually happened. A mob of left-wing extremists stormed a Christian church in Minnesota during Sunday service, with Don Lemon right there in the middle of it, filming, coordinating, acting like a journalist while participating in a federal crime. And when charges were filed, a judge with direct ties to anti-ICE political networks dismissed them. But here's the part that should terrify every American. The Department of Justice isn't letting this go. They're building a Plan B, and Don Lemon just realized he's not untouchable after all. Before we dive into the evidence, and trust me, the evidence is damning, I need you to do something. Hit that like button right now, because YouTube's algorithm is actively suppressing this story. The mainstream media won't cover it. Big tech doesn't want you to see it. Your like tells the algorithm, this matters, people need to know, and drop a comment. Tell me, should Don Lemon face the same charges as the people he was filming with? Or does being a celebrity journalist put you above the law? Let's get into it. January 2025, Minnesota, a Christian church holding Sunday service. Families are praying, children are present. It's a sacred space, protected not just by tradition, but by federal law. Then the doors burst open. A group of anti-ICE activists storms in. They're filming, they're chanting, they're disrupting a religious service to make a political statement. And right there, camera in hand, is Don Lemon. Now, Lemon wants you to believe he was just doing journalism, that he was observing, documenting, reporting. But here's what the evidence shows. He didn't stumble onto this event. He was in contact with the organizers beforehand. He knew what was going to happen. He coordinated his arrival. That's not journalism. That's participation. According to federal law, specifically Title 18, Section 247 of the U.S. Code, it is a crime to intentionally obstruct persons in the enjoyment of their free exercise of religious beliefs. It's also a crime to intentionally damage religious property. The maximum penalty: 3 years in federal prison. Let that sink in. Within days of the church raid, federal agents moved. William Kelly, identified as one of the ringleaders, was arrested. And the DOJ made sure everyone saw it. They didn't do a quiet booking. They did a perp walk, handcuffs, federal agents, cameras rolling. Why? Because the Department of Justice, under this administration, is sending a message. You don't get to violate federal law and hide behind activism. You don't get to storm churches and claim you're on the right side of history. Kelly was charged with multiple federal offenses related to the church intrusion. His bail hearing made national news. And suddenly, everyone involved in that raid started getting very, very nervous, except Don Lemon. Lemon went on his show, his platform with millions of viewers, and he didn't apologize. He didn't express regret. He dared the Department of Justice to come after him. Arrest me, he said. You can't silence me. I'm a journalist. I have First Amendment protections. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Don Lemon watches his co-participants get arrested. He sees federal charges filed. He knows the DOJ is serious, and his response is to taunt them on national television. That's not courage, that's arrogance. It's the arrogance of someone who spent years believing the rules don't apply to him. But here's what Lemon didn't count on. The Department of Justice doesn't bluff. So the DOJ files charges against Don Lemon, criminal complaint. Federal court, Minnesota. The case lands on the desk of Judge Douglas Micko. And what does Judge Micko do? He dismisses it. Not because the evidence was weak, not because Lemon had a strong legal defense. He dismissed it on procedural grounds, technical issues that could easily be remedied. Now, normally, when a judge dismisses a case on technicalities, prosecutors just refile with corrections. It happens all the time. But this dismissal felt different. And when people started digging into Judge Micko's background, they found something very interesting. Judge Douglas Micko's wife works in the Minnesota Attorney General's office. Specifically, she works under Keith Ellison. Now, who is Keith Ellison? He's the Minnesota Attorney General, a former congressman, and one of the most vocal anti-ICE politicians in America. Ellison has filed over 40 lawsuits against federal immigration enforcement. He's called ICE a deportation force. He's publicly opposed cooperation with federal immigration authorities. And his office employee's husband just happens to be the judge who dismissed charges against a celebrity journalist who participated in an anti-ICE church raid. I'm not saying there's a smoking gun here. I'm not making direct accusations of corruption. But I am saying this: when you have a judge whose household has direct financial ties to an anti-ICE political figure, and that judge dismisses charges against someone who participated in an anti-ICE demonstration, questions need to be asked. And those questions are being asked right now, according to public records. And this is documented. A Judge Micko's wife has social media activity showing she liked posts critical of ICE operations, posts calling for sanctuary policies, posts aligned with the exact political movement that organized a church raid. Again, I'm not saying this influenced the judge's decision, but it creates the appearance of a conflict of interest, and in the American justice system, the appearance of impartiality matters just as much as actual impartiality. Let me ask you a question. If Don Lemon had participated in a raid on a mosque, would Judge Micko have dismissed those charges? If a group of right-wing activists had stormed a synagogue during Sabbath services, and a Fox News personality was filming with them, would the media be calling it journalism? You know the answer. There would be federal hate crime charges filed within 24 hours. There would be congressional hearings. There would be demands for life sentences. But because this was a Christian church, and because the perpetrators were left-wing activists, suddenly it is a First Amendment issue. Suddenly it's protected political speech. That's the double standard we're living with in America today. And it's not just about Don Lemon. It's about a justice system that applies different rules based on your politics, your ideology, your connections. Think about this. Lemon participated in a church raid. The evidence is on video. He admits he was there. But when someone with the right connections is involved, suddenly the system finds a way to make the charges disappear. Now, imagine if this had been a black church. Seriously, imagine Don Lemon and a group of activists stormed a historically black church in the South during Sunday service. Do you think that congregation would have sat there quietly while cameras rolled? Do you think there wouldn't have been immediate, forceful resistance? And do you think the legal system would have treated it as lightly as they were treating this Minnesota case? The hypocrisy is staggering. Christianity is the one religion in America that you can attack with impunity. You can mock it in media. You can disrupt its services. You can violate its sacred spaces. And the cultural elite, people like Don Lemon, will defend it as progressive activism. But the same people who stormed that church in Minnesota would never dare to do the same thing to a mosque or a synagogue, because they know the consequences would be swift and severe. That's not equality under the law. That's selective prosecution, based on which victims the system decides are worth protecting. So Judge Micko dismissed the charges. Don Lemon celebrated on his show. His supporters claimed victory. But here's what they didn't understand. The Department of Justice doesn't give up that easily. According to sources close to the investigation, federal prosecutors are now pursuing what's being called Plan B. What does that mean? It means they're looking at different jurisdictions, different statutes, different legal theories that don't require Judge Micko's approval. One option: charge Lemon in a different federal district. The church raid violated federal law, which means it can be prosecuted anywhere in the country where venue is proper. If Minnesota judges are compromised, try it in a different circuit. Another option: expand the charges beyond just the church intrusion. Look into conspiracy. Look into whether Lemon and the organizers plan this event in advance. Conspiracy charges carry heavier penalties and require a higher standard of proof, but they also bypass some of the procedural issues that allowed Micko to dismiss the initial complaint. Third option: civil rights charges. If the DOJ can prove that the church raid was intended to intimidate worshippers based on their religious beliefs, that opens up an entirely different legal framework. Civil rights violations carry serious federal penalties. And here's the thing: the evidence is already there. We have video of Don Lemon inside the church. We have his own admissions that he was in contact with the organizers. We have social media posts from the participants showing this was a coordinated political action, not spontaneous journalism. The DOJ has everything they need. They just need a judge who will actually apply the law, and they're going to find one. Now, let's talk about why Don Lemon thought he could get away with this. Because this isn't the first time Lemon has been involved in controversial situations and walked away clean. Over the years, Lemon has made comments that would have ended anyone else's career. He's been accused of bias so extreme that even CNN eventually pushed him out. He's faced multiple scandals, multiple allegations, multiple moments where people thought, this is it. This is the end. And every single time, he's survived. Why? Because Don Lemon is part of a protected class in American media. He's a prominent black journalist. He's openly gay. He's positioned himself as a voice for marginalized communities. And in the current cultural climate, that makes him virtually untouchable. The media protects him. His network protected him for years. His colleagues defend him, and when he faces criticism, his supporters immediately claim it's motivated by racism or homophobia. It's the ultimate shield. But here's what Lemon didn't understand. Federal law doesn't care about your identity. It doesn't care about your media platform. And the Department of Justice under this administration isn't backing down because someone might call them names. When you participate in a federal crime, and storming a church during services is a federal crime, your identity doesn't protect you. Your celebrity doesn't protect you. And your connections to friendly judges only protect you for so long. Lemon thought he was untouchable because he's been untouchable his entire career. He's operated in an environment where the rules were bent in his favor. But the rules are changing, and Lemon is about to find out what accountability looks like. Let's go back to Judge Micko for a moment, because this story gets even more disturbing when you look at the details. Judge Micko's wife, as I mentioned, works for Keith Ellison's office. She's a state employee. Her salary is paid by Minnesota taxpayers. But it's not just her employment that raises questions. It's her public political activity. According to social media archives, and these are publicly available, anyone can verify this, Judge Micko's wife has repeatedly engaged with anti-ICE content online. She's liked posts calling ICE a Gestapo. She's shared articles critical of deportation enforcement. She's expressed support for sanctuary city policies. Now, she has every right to her political opinions. First Amendment protects that. But when your husband is a federal judge presiding over a case involving anti-ICE activists, and you work for an anti-ICE politician, and you publicly support anti-ICE causes, how is that not a conflict of interest? In any normal justice system, Judge Micko would have recused himself from this case the moment it was assigned to him. He would have said, "My wife works for Keith Ellison. Ellison is a vocal opponent of ICE. This case involves anti-ICE activists. I can't be impartial." That's what ethical judges do. But Micko didn't recuse himself. He took the case, and he dismissed it. Maybe it was a legitimate legal decision. Maybe the procedural issues he cited were real. But the optics are terrible. And in a justice system that's supposed to operate on public trust, optics matter. This is what people mean when they talk about the deep state. Not some shadowy conspiracy, but a network of connected individuals who protect each other, who share the same ideology, who use their positions of power to advance a political agenda. Judge Micko protects Don Lemon. Don Lemon amplifies anti-ICE narratives. Keith Ellison files lawsuits against ICE. Micko's wife works for Ellison. It's a circle, a closed loop of mutual protection. And the American people are waking up to it. So why does any of this matter? Why should you care about Don Lemon and a church raid in Minnesota? Because this story is a microcosm of everything wrong with America right now. You have activists who believe they can violate the law as long as their cause is righteous. You have a media figure who thinks his celebrity makes him immune to consequences. You have a judge with obvious conflicts of interest who dismisses charges anyway. And you have a justice system that applies different standards based on who you are and what you believe. That's not America. That's not the country our founders envisioned. That's not the rule of law. And if we don't stand up and demand accountability, if we don't push back against this corruption, it will only get worse. Don Lemon is not special. He's not above the law. And neither is anyone else who participated in that church raid. The families who were worshipping that day deserve justice. The Christian community that was violated deserves justice, and the American people who believe in equal application of the law deserve to see these criminals prosecuted. Not because we hate Don Lemon, not because we're trying to silence journalists, but because when you storm a church during a religious service, you've crossed a line, and there have to be consequences. The Department of Justice understands this. That's why they're pursuing Plan B. That's why they're not giving up. And when those charges are refiled, when a new judge looks at this case with fresh eyes, Don Lemon is going to face the same justice system that everyone else faces. No special treatment, no celebrity privilege, no protection from friendly judges. Just the law, applied equally, the way it's supposed to be. But we need to zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture here, because the church raid in Minnesota wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern. For years now, we've watched the left-wing establishments attack Christianity in America. They mock Christian values in entertainment. They push Christian business owners to violate their consciences. They label Christian beliefs as hate speech. And now they're physically disrupting Christian worship. This didn't start with Don Lemon. He's just the latest example. Remember when pro-abortion activists stormed Catholic churches across the country after the Dobbs decision? Remember the vandalism, the threats, the violence directed at pro-life pregnancy centers? How many of those cases resulted in serious prosecutions? How many of those activists are sitting in federal prison right now? Barely any. Because when the left attacks Christianity, the justice system looks the other way. But if a conservative activist even protests peacefully outside an abortion clinic, they get hit with federal charges under the FACE Act. They face years in prison for praying on a public sidewalk. The double standard isn't subtle anymore. It's brazen, and the Don Lemon case is just the most recent, most visible example. The activists who raided that church believed they were on the right side of history. They believed their opposition to ICE justified violating a sacred space. They believed the ends justified the means. That's the mentality of extremism. That's the mentality that leads to violence. And when the media, people like Don Lemon, amplifies and justifies that extremism, it gets worse. So yes, this story matters. It matters because it exposes the rot at the heart of our institutions. It matters because it shows how far the left is willing to go to advance their agenda. And it matters because if we don't hold these people accountable, they will keep pushing, they will keep escalating. And eventually, someone is going to get seriously hurt. So what happens next? The Department of Justice refiles charges against Don Lemon. New venue, new legal theory, new judge, and this time, there's no Judge Micko to dismiss them on technicalities. Lemon will have to answer for what he did. He'll have to stand trial. He'll have to face the same justice system that William Kelly faced. And if he is convicted, when he is convicted, it will send a message to every activist, every journalist, every celebrity who thinks they're above the law. You're not. Your politics don't protect you. Your platform doesn't protect you. Your connections don't protect you. When you break federal law, there are consequences. But here's what we need to do. We need to keep the pressure on. Share this video. Make sure people know what happened in that Minnesota church. Make sure they know about Judge Micko's conflicts of interest. Make sure they know the DOJ is pursuing justice, because the mainstream media is burying this story. They don't want you to know that one of their own participated in a federal crime. So it's up to us, independent voices, citizen journalists, patriots who care about the rule of law, to get the truth out there. Drop a comment right now. Tell me, do you trust the justice system to hold Don Lemon accountable? Or do you think his connections will protect him again? Hit that subscribe button. Because we're going to follow this case all the way to the end. We're going to document every development, every court filing, every attempt to sweep this under the rug. And we're going to make sure that Don Lemon doesn't get away with it. Not this time. This is about more than one celebrity journalist. This is about whether we're a nation of laws or a nation of men. This is about whether justice applies equally to everyone or only to people without connections. And I believe, I have to believe, that justice will prevail. The DOJ is coming, the evidence is overwhelming. And Don Lemon's days of being untouchable are over. Let's make sure of it. God bless America. And God bless the rule of law.